All right, so we don't want to work with 3 million polygons or about 3 million polygons because that would just be too heavy. It would make our scene really slow if we worked that way. So I'm going to press tab and start typing Polyreduce. This is the node that will reduce our polygons. And you'll notice that Houdini is freezing up a little bit because it has to think through how to reduce 3 million polygons. As a matter of fact, every single time we make a change to this Polyreduce node, for instance, if I go up to this percent to keep and I change it to 90, you'll notice at the very bottom left that it's going to say that it's thinking about reducing the polygons. And this is cool because we can actually see where Houdini is trying to bake things in or trying to cook things within this node chain that we have. However, let's say that we want to tell Houdini to not think about making a new bake every single time we change something up here in this parameter window. What we can do is we can go to the very bottom right. Right now it says auto update, but we can change this to manual. And now if we go to change any of this, it's not going to try thinking about it. As a matter of fact, it's not going to do anything until we hit this refresh button that's right next to it. And another way you could tell that we are in manual mode is that you'll see this little tooltip. It says update mode is manual, so our view may be out of date. All right, so now that we have that going, let's change our target, or this setting, to output polygon counts. And I happen to know that about 100,000 polygons will preserve most of the detail while reducing our polygon count by quite a lot. So there's 100,000 polygons, and I'm going to press refresh so that it thinks about it. Now that we are done thinking about that, we have this number to keep, 100,000. If I hold middle mouse over the Polyreduce, we have 100,000. So that's looking great. And there's one more thing I want to show you about this Polyreduce that's really cool. I'm going to zoom into the face here and notice how we actually lost a lot of detail in this face, especially around the eyes. I'm just not liking how much detail is present in the eyes. Well, this is a perfect opportunity to show you how we can paint certain areas to keep more detail. And this is also a perfect excuse to talk about attributes and what attributes do inside of Houdini. So first of all, I'm going to change this from manual back to auto update. So we have that. The next thing I want to show you is up in the parameters, we have this thing called retain density by attributes. And if we check this box, we have this attribute and it's going to be called retention. Now, because we are on auto update, it's going to be thinking about this for a second. But while it thinks about that, I just want to talk about Houdini in general, what attributes are, and why they're so important, and why they're so central to why people use Houdini. Think of attributes, if you're not familiar with what they are, think of attributes like extra pieces of information that you can attach to certain parts of your geometry. So our points here exist in our 3D space, and one of the attributes that the points have attached to them is their position. So that when Houdini is drawing the rhino in our viewports, it's looking for this attribute, it's called a position, and that's how it knows where to draw it in our viewports. Similarly, we can add other attributes like color, or in this case, we can add retention. And these attributes all basically stick to different parts of our geometry. To show you this in another way, let's say that we go up to this geometry spreadsheet up here. This is a very helpful view that ends up being used a lot when you're working with Houdini. And you might remember how I was telling you how everything has a position. Well, if you notice, we have our points selected here. If I hover over it, it says points. And under points, we have our position in X, Y, and Z. And then we have all of the points that make up Alfred listed from from 0 to, well, in this case, about 50,000, which makes sense because if we middle mouse over this Polyreduce, we have about 50,000 points here as well. So every point has an ID, It has attributes associated with it, which are like little bits of information. And what we're trying to do now is we're trying to add a new piece of information called retention to these points, so that by the time we reach this Polyreduce node and it's going through our geometry and it's reducing everything, it's going to be on the lookout for this attribute called retention. And if it goes over a point during its calculation and it says, whoa, look at that, we have retention, then it knows that it should preserve detail. And that's how this whole thing works. As a matter of fact, the reason why so many people use Houdini and the reason why it's very strong is that because the way it manages attributes is really just clean. It's well done. It's easy to see. Oftentimes in 3D packages, it can be a little bit difficult to get a sense of where attributes are and what they're doing. So anyway, let's add that right now. And the way we can do this is that we can paint it. So I'm going to drop down a paint node. And the paint node does a whole lot of things. One of the things that we're going to do with it in this case is we're going to paint our new attribute called retention. I'm going to hit escape so that we don't try to cook the Polyreduce node. I'm going to set my visibility to paint now. And now I'm going to show you how to paint things with Houdini. So let's zoom into our face. In order to activate the paint tool, go to this little multi-widget thing. And since we have the paint node selected, it's going to give us a brush. To change the size, hold down Shift, and then also hold down right mouse. And as you drag left and right, it'll change the size. So now that we're here, we want to configure what this paint node is going to do. So if we go up here at the very top, we have our group, and I'll talk about groups later. We have our merge mode, which means what is this thing going to do? It's going to replace a value. Have our foreground color, our background color. The main thing that we want to concern ourselves with right now is this override color. And we're actually going to say, instead of painting color, I want to paint an attribute. So if I say override color and I type in retention, like that, now our Rhino has changed. It's red because now it's trying to visualize this attribute for us using a infrared mode down there. But we can change this to grayscale, and now we'll be able to paint black and white values. So before I paint, I want to go back to our geometry spreadsheet and show you what's happened. We now have this color, which is CD RGB. If I go ahead and I actually, okay, there we go. So I don't know why it was trying to cook the Polyreduce for a second. It was trying to cook that, and I think that's where it got confused. Anyway, we're here at the paint now, and we have this retention. And this retention is at 0, which is black. So if we go back to our scene, we have retention. I'm going to go back to my paint tool by clicking this multi-widget. So now we're painting. Our color is set to white, and now we can just start painting white, and these are the areas that will eventually preserve detail. So I'm just going to paint these areas. I want to paint the mouth region as well, and by doing this, we can basically just mask out the area. So I'm going to quickly just go through and paint a few spots. Just like this. I'm going to set my color now to black to erase certain spots. So I'm just going to clean up this area, and we really just want the main face zone. That's what I'm trying to preserve here. Just like that. Great. And let's make sure we take off the horn a little bit. We don't need that. Okay, so just the nose, just the snout, and the eyes. That's looking good. Now if I go to my geometry spreadsheet, we have retention, and if I click retention, I can now sort it by its highest value. So now the areas in white, and again, these are the points associated, have a value of 1, and the areas in black have 0. Great. When we go back here, we have Alfred again. And now when we go to our Polyreduce, let's reduce this one more time and see the result. And as you can see, we now have a lot more detail in this area that we painted. What's cool is that we did not actually add any more polygons. If I middle mouse over the Polyreduce, we are still at 100,000 polygons. So that's really cool. We just added more detail where we needed more detail, and that's it. Anyway, that is a quick overview of attributes and a very brief example of how you might control attributes. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to cache this out, and then we're going to switch gears onto materials.